you guys please accept. Okay. Hi, thank you so much to everybody who's joining us. My name is Katherine Steinberg. I'm the Director of Content Strategy at New American Economy. New American Economy is a bipartisan immigration organization fighting for fair immigration policies all across the United States. And we started this film club as a way to build empathy through the language of cinema. And today's screening is the incredible movie, The Donut King. I loved it so much. And we're really lucky to be joined by director Alice Gu, the owner of DK's Donuts, Mei Li Tao, and Looking for America's Philippa Hughes, who founded this. So thank you all so much for being here. Can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I really want to dive right in and get chatting. So Alice, would you mind telling me a little bit about the movie in your own words and what inspired you to make the film?
The Donut King it's really an American story, an American dream story, a rags to riches story. It is the story of Ted Noi, the Donut King, a Cambodian refugee who arrived penniless to America in 1975 without knowing a single soul, and as a refugee from Cambodia. And within 3 short years, through grit and hard work and perseverance, worked his way from a gas station attendant and church custodian to an unlikely donut empire mogul. And along the way, the second wave of refugees arrived in 1981. And at this time, Ted Noi was well established and sponsored hundreds of refugees, sponsored them for visas, taught them the ways of the donut business, and helped a lot of these other Cambodian families get their foots a hold here in America and on their way to the American dream.
So what was it about Ted's story that really spoke to you and made you think like this documentary must be made?
It was it's a little bit hard to explain, but the second that I saw his story, it was something that captivated me right away. It was, his life alone is quite Shakespearean, but the story of coming here and making something for his, now American raised kids, that was something that really resonated with me, and it felt very personal for me. I'm not Cambodian American, I'm Chinese American. However, so many of the themes run true. My parents coming here to this country, looking for the American dream, the grit and sacrifice. So I think what drew me so strongly to it was that it was a way to be able to tell my story without it being my story. But in making the film, I actually realized it's not just my story, it's kind of everybody's story. It's such an American story, and
it really is.
Thank you so much for connecting with the film.
It's hard not to connect with the film. I mean, I think there's so much there. There's, the entrepreneur angle, there's immigration, there's that feeling of being the only person who can really like decide your own fate. It is very American. There's a lot there. And particularly, Mei Li, you're in the movie. Like, what was it like for you being part of this documentary? And, how was it hearing your mom talk about her experiences?
I mean, being a part of the documentary was such an honor, and it was a really fun experience. I got to conduct the things that I do in my normal day life, but just have Alice and Jose follow me around, whether that be at an 8,000 person donut festival or, just at the shop while I'm doing my normal things of helping customers, doing my social media thing where I'm promoting what's hot at the shop. And, to have my mom actually say yes to agree to be in the film was also a once in a lifetime thing. So for those of you who don't know, it took me about a year and a half. Actually took Alice and I a year and a half to try to get my mom to be a part of the film. And, Alice and I, we were always texting and trying to like plan this. And my mom, she's like, no, I don't want to. And I had to really pull the mom, if you love me type of card, which, then she was finally like, okay, yes, I'll do it. And I'm so happy that she did. I think my mom's story is extremely powerful. It is so genuine and raw. It was her first time being on video, which she told me when she got home that she had made everybody in the room cry with her story. And I said, well, yeah, Mom, like your story is so powerful and it's so meaningful, and it's resonates with so many people that, it's it would be a shame if you didn't share it. And I'm proud of you. And, you know, that's my exchange with her. And now, you know, that the film has been out, and we have just countless people coming in and, you know, pointing at her and be like, I saw you in the film. Oh my gosh, I loved your story. Can we take a selfie? I mean, I think my mom is now understanding the impact of telling her story, especially with this documentary and having it highlight my entire family and their journey here.
You know, that's a really wonderful way to talk about it. It's like her story is impacting so many people. And, you know, welcome, Philippa, because that is something that you do so well. So can you talk a little bit about Looking for America and how you use people's stories and what kind of impact that has?
Yeah, I just want to say, Alice, I love this film so much. So delightful.
You know?
And, you know, it was such great storytelling. I mean, speaking of stories, it was such great storytelling. And, you know, and I really think a lot about the way stories can spark empathy between people. And that's sort of the core of Looking for America. I mean, it started out as just people coming over to have dinner at my house right after the 2016 election. I'm at my dining table here, and I would, you know, make food for people. And I just wanted to talk to people. Like, I was so upset by the election, and I just was like, I gotta understand. And that led to this national project that, you know, that I've co-founded with New American Economy, in which we went around the country asking people, what does it mean to be American? Asking them, our artists, to express that through their work, but also asking people from across the political spectrum to answer that question and to tell their stories. And the reason why for us it's so important to tell those stories is because, you know, we're not trying to persuade anybody or change anyone. And in fact, you can't like throw facts and figures at people and expect anybody to change. And in fact, there's social science that says that, like, when you start doing that, you actually can push them further into their ideological corner, and, you know, they become more combative. But when you tell your personal story, that's when people actually see each other as real human beings and not just as, you know, social media avatars. That's when you can start seeing shifts in behavior and ways of thinking. So anyway, so that's why that is at the core of what Looking for America is, and that's why I just love this film so much.
I mean, do you feel like when people come to these dinners now across the United States, like telling their personal story changes the whole tenor of the room?
Totally. I mean, people are very sort of reticent when they first come in because, you know, as you know, we have a very polarized country and people tend to yell at each other a lot. So they're very reticent. But once you start like sharing something of yourself and you hear, it just transforms the whole conversation into something where it's like joyful. I'm not used that word before, but it's almost joyful, because then, like, that's how you create a sense of like this fabric, like your piece in the fabric of humanity, like your role in it. When you start to see that it's not just you, and it's not just, you know, your family, but it's like all the families together, interwoven together. It's so fun.
That is. I mean, when you've been showing this movie, Alice, what has the reaction been upon hearing Ted's story? Is there anything that stands out to you? You know, someone that's come up to you and shared what it was like for them to see Ted's, you know, whole, like you said, Shakespearean arc on the big screen?
I think the overwhelming, the comments that I've heard the most is, wow, I had no idea, right? This is something that is, if you're in, particularly if you are in California, but I would say anyway, I mean, donut shops are everywhere. Donuts are so American. They, there goes the dog, sorry. Donuts are so American, and so many, I mean, this is one of the reasons why this story captivated me in the first place, right? I grew up, born and raised in Los Angeles. These donut shops on every corner are very, very familiar to me. I've been to these donut shops since I was a little girl and recognized that there were Asian people working in them. Never questioned what kind of Asian person, why they're all owned by Asian people. It was just kind of a thing, and I accepted it. And after reading the first article, I was like, oh my God. I'm like, this is the story of all of these people. These really nice Asian people had gone through all of these crazy atrocities before they were here serving coffee and donuts to us. And it was this, I never knew. And I think there's so much to be discovered if you are curious. You know, this is something that is literally right under our noses. This is something that we don't even think twice about for eating. You know, this is like, you know, this
Yeah.
great little simple, we think of like empty calories, this like sweet treat, but something
Yeah.
that is just sweet treat, that's something we don't even think about. It was literally a lifeline for Cambodian Americans. And if you take a second to be curious or to learn about that, you're like, oh my God, it's like all of a sudden you see the world with these like, I don't know, like 5-dimensional glasses. You're just seeing everything super clearly in a completely different light. So the most rewarding takeaway from audiences for me is when they reach out and say, wow, I had no idea. I'm going to go right into my local donut shop right now. I will never go into my local donut shop or any donut shop and look at them in the same way ever again. And they're like, for that matter, actually, any immigrant owned business, I will never look at them the same way ever again. And that is by far the most rewarding. It's, again, my film, and in my filmmaking, I never want to tell somebody how they should feel, but I want to be able to present the information and the stories in a way that piques curiosity and interest and opens eyes and hearts and minds.
And I think you really did an incredible job of that. I can't think of anybody that wouldn't want to learn more after watching the movie. And speaking of in general, you're like, it's right under your nose. There's so many. I mean, the number of refugee entrepreneurs in California is over 51,000. There's over 829,000 immigrant entrepreneurs in California. And that actually translates into $45.6 billion in revenue from Asian run restaurants in California. I mean, these are pretty incredible numbers. Talk about being like right under your nose. You know, Mei Li, as you work in the donut shop and you've grown the business, which you've done an incredible job. Has anybody come up to you? Has there been a reaction to your mom's story or your story after the movie?
Oh my God, like every single second. It's like I've actually been working some graveyard shifts and some morning shifts due to some staff changes. And it's like I see a person come in, I can see from the corner of their eye, they have this shiny look of like, oh my God, is it her? And then they'll come up to me and they'll be like, what, did I see you in the film? And you know, it's almost like this like stardom of somebody being like, and then they just tell me exactly how they felt. Some people, like for example, on National Donut Day, we had a couple come in from Miami who had seen it on their flight over, and they were like, this is the first place we're going to stop. And they just, you know, they felt so connected to the story because their parents are immigrants themselves. I had a Hispanic couple come in the other night around like 9 p.m. and the older woman, the mom, was just like looking at me and just kind of like shy, like, and the son was like, were you in the film? And I said, yes. She's like, oh my God, my mom loved it. She immediately wanted to come here. And she's like, she's so happy to meet you. And like your mom's story is just, it resonates with me because it reminds me of my mom's story. Or, oh, I just love how she explained, you know, all the different types of donuts that existed that she needed to know to run her business. I mean, there are people who have come in and said, it's such a great film. They are so glad that it came out. And the fact that, you know, it's out on Hulu now is also great because now it's easier accessible to the general public of like, oh, I've seen that trailer. I've always wanted to watch it, but I just didn't know, you know, how. And now, you know, people are being able to go and watch it. But I would say overall, just like, I even get direct messages on Instagram, and sometimes these people have like a whole synopsis and really, really specific questions like, where's Ted now? What's he doing? Like, how did his kids feel? And, you know, I get a lot of people even from like the Midwest or on the East Coast emailing me, and they're just, you know, sharing their experiences. I even had one woman from Kansas City who said, you know, your mom is such an incredible person. Your family tells such a beautiful story. If you're ever in Kansas Kansas City. Please come and visit me. Like I'll provide room and board to like, you know, provide that for you. So I would say overwhelmingly the support is amazing. And, you know, this is just a story in my family, and that it just like, it touches so many people in so many different ways just through this thing called the donut. You know, people came for the donuts, but they just stayed for so much more.
Well, speaking of Ted and asking this question, what was your relationship to Ted before the movie, and what is your relationship with Ted now?
Before the movie, I mean, Ted was he was my great uncle. He definitely had some, you know, interesting reputation said about him from my parents. And, you know, he was kind of this distant figure who you would hear his name, but you wouldn't really know much. They wouldn't really talk about him that much. So essentially, he was just a Facebook friend. And, you know, not really interacting with him that much. My parents, you know, they are still very old school. And I guess, you know, they didn't want me to kind of take after what he had done, which was, you know, he had a terrible gambling problem. So before the film, it was pretty non-existent. And then, you know, after the film, I was actually able to not only, you know, go visit him last year in Cambodia and just chat with him, even did an interview on my podcast with him and just get to know him as a person, but it really opened up this relationship of, oh my gosh, like niece, like you make the family so proud. Like, I can't believe, you know, you were able to do this. And, you know, anytime I'm posting anything donut related on my, you know, social media, I've got their overwhelming support of like, oh, you make us so proud, or like, you're so smart, congratulations. And so Ted, you know, he's just this older man, and he's just going through life. I mean, I always describe his life like a roller coaster. You know, it's like up and then down and then it's up again. And you know, at the end of the day, he's just like it's a sweet old man. He's a human being, and ultimately, you know, his impact, I think, far outweighed the harm that he did. So I think the documentary does such a great job in explaining it from somewhat of a neutral standpoint of this is exactly what happened. So our relationship's actually great. He'll send me pictures of him having like traditional, like, did you breakfast, and he'll take a picture of his kids and send them to me and send me these like inspirational quotes. I also ask him like, all right, uncle, like, what's my wisdom word for today? And he'll just kind of give his little spiel about whatever he's thinking of on that day.
Wow, wisdom words. I like that. I need to start asking people in my life for wisdom words. Why don't I do this? I mean, Philippa, like one of the things I think is really interesting about Looking for America, but also what you do is, I think there's a lot of like family divides, especially now, you know, like partisan politics. It's like you have your cousin over here and your uncle over here. And like maybe even within your immediate nuclear family, there's like a million different viewpoints and it becomes really tense. So, you know, was hearing that the Donut King, like amazing job reconnecting all of these people with Ted, you know, it was kind of tense. Like, what do you think the best way to do that is, or have you found that people in this program that you're running have reconnected? And like, how do you even talk to people once the family myth becomes, I think, bigger than the person themselves?
I don't know if you know this about me, Kat, but or maybe you're setting me up for this, but you know, pretty much everybody in my immediate family is very different from me politically. They are very conservative, and many of my older relatives are also very conservative. And it was fascinating to me. Like I never really explored that until my first cousin became director of ICE under Trump last year. And, you know, it was very shocking to me that he would take that position. And so I wrote about it a lot. I tried to learn, and it became more clear about, you know, why he did that. And it made me feel more, I don't know if I felt more empathy. Yes, I felt more empathy once I learned like this whole history. And so kind of to Alice's point earlier, I just never asked before. I mean, I kind of knew the vague outlines of our family history, but, you know, I just never understood it very deeply. And once I did, I realized, oh, like there's a lot of really good reasons why he came to this kind of ideology that would lead him to this kind of position. So anyway, that was kind of a long way to say that, you know, one of the things that kind of stuck out for me in the movie was Ted, you know, supporting all the Republicans and supporting Pete Wilson, who was like kind of one of the more anti-immigrant governors of California, frankly. So it was like kind of interesting that, you know, he kind of took that same path that like my family has taken, where they're like, build the wall and keep out all the refugees, even though many of my own family members also came through that same refugee program. They went to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas instead of Pendleton. And I don't know. So I just, again, one of the things that I really like about this kind of storytelling that you've done is that it shows that the complexity of our humanity. It isn't like some kind of like monolithic immigrant or refugee story. It's like, these are human beings, each with their own complex story. And some of it is very unexpected from what our, you know, stereotypes are about people. And so it does behoove us to be much more curious, because the stories are not going to be the same across the spectrum.
I think if I can jump in, because this is something that I'm very passionate about in my very blessed life as a filmmaker, and where I've been fortunate enough to go. You know, I live in California. I'm, again, very progressive liberal. My friends are in this, I'm in this like blue progressive liberal bubble where, you know, I'm very happy being. But my job has taken me to all kinds of different places all over the US, places that I would never go on vacation. So I'm really lucky that my job as a filmmaker has taken me to coal country. It's taken me to defunct old steel towns in Pennsylvania. It has taken me to border towns. It has taken me to Western Texas, that is like population 1,200 South Street. I mean, I've been to all these teeny tiny towns where I'm way outside of my bubble. And I think it's so important to actually talk to people and to have a curiosity. Like, I feel like the news right now and everything's just like, oh, there's X, Y, and Z reasons to not like this group of people. And this group of people are terrible. And everybody is now like lumped into these groups that we can generalize how we feel about a particular group. Whereas at your dinner parties or whatever, you can invite people from all over the ideological spectrum, I feel like. And if you were forced to sit there and be like, oh, you love your mom? I love my mom too. God, I didn't know that Republicans could love their moms too. You know, you actually find that there are many more ways to connect than to disconnect. And I feel like this curiosity and this type of conversation, is kind of understanding, is actually the path, in my humble opinion, to a more peaceful, cohesive, like understanding and place that we want to be. It's through conversation, curiosity, and understanding. And so I love that this family member of you who became director of ICE, and yeah, that would be the knee-jerk reaction, be like, oh God, oh my God, you know, but then you talk, and it's, until you have these conversations, it's very easy to have knee-jerk reactions and all kinds of opinions. But it really takes the conversations. I'm sorry if I don't know if I hijacked this conversation.
Oh, you didn't at all. I was just thinking, you know, it's impossible to ignore the really upsetting and disturbing rise in violence against the AAPI community right now. And like, as we're all trying to think through, like, what can create a more peaceful society where we're not all angry at each other and there isn't this violence, like, I think there's a lot of wisdom in your words about learning and being curious and trying to see each other as people and less as an archetype that you have in your mind that you've been told about and you didn't go investigate yourself. And I mean, to that end, like, Maylee, I'm curious. I think you said that your mom, when we talked, was sort of reluctant to talk about herself and her story. And, you know, have you probed her about that anymore? Or is that something you think she's gotten, like, you know, she's gotten comfortable talking about it? Or do you think this is something that she just doesn't want to revisit, really?
I think growing up, you know, I talk about this a lot in the panels that I do about generational trauma and how, you know, like there has been a lot of trauma that she's gone through with her journey, you know, being a refugee, even before that, you know, living in concentration camps, trying to escape concentration camps, living as a homeless person. I mean, you know, almost starving. Like there are just so many things that she had gone through that as a young girl, when she would tell me these stories, I did not know how to process. I always just was like, oh my God, like this is so sad. I don't know what to do with my emotions. And as I got older, and especially when the documentary came out, I said, okay, well, now she goes on these tirades where she'll start from the beginning of the story all the way until the end. And I remember even as a kid seeing sometimes she would like almost like start crying. But as a kid, like you think your parents are the most strongest beings ever and that they don't really cry. Well, she never even like shed the tear. She just like looked like she was going to cry. But I mean, I think as she starts to, start telling her story a little bit more, it's getting a little bit easier for her, but to really relive it by telling it, that's when she starts getting emotional about, what she went through. After the documentary was out, actually she told me, she's like, oh my God, I could have added so much more details, but I didn't have any practice. I didn't know like how to phrase it. And I was like, well, Mom, like, it's fine. Like you still have these stories. Like I plan on like making a book for her stories in particular, and to just like, preserve these stories so that later on, when the next generation of second generation, third generation, like we're not going to have that same, I guess, like connection as like my mom did when she told me her story, because that is like my mom. Next, it'll be just, oh, great grandma did this. And it's such a far away thing that these emotions and stories definitely need to get captured. I think for her, she's just, I guess, more like she wants to say it in a clear way in English. And she's always like very like, oh, I can't speak English that well. I was like, Mom, like, what are you talking about? People totally understood you. And even the way that exactly the way you are and the way that she tells her story is enough. And it definitely is portrayed in how raw her storytelling is and how truthful it is as well.
I can't even imagine. I think, like what Alice said, I feel very privileged not to have that immediate life experience. And it's important. I think what you're doing for your mom is wonderful. Like it's important to have a record of these stories, to really understand where people come from. And I think about Ted's story too, and how, he had some conservative support. He, was sort of Republican aligned as well, which we're bipartisan. So we support, Republicans, Democrats, like we're here for a fair immigration system. But, Ted sponsored so many other refugees coming over, and like, that also is incredible and an incredible story. And like, does anybody here have an opinion on like, is that the American dream? Like, was that his slice of the American dream, being able to magnanimously help all of these refugees come over and like start their life?
I think in speaking with Ted at the time, it was something that was just, he didn't even think about it. Things were so crazy in Cambodia, not hearing from family members, friends, cousins. And, to me, it was because of his connections with the embassy and, his place in life, that when he would get a call and he says, will you sponsor them? He says, yes, of course. He doesn't even think twice. It's like, oh God, I can help people have an opportunity to come here. Of course. And then it became revealed that there were all these people who actually weren't related. He's like, yeah, sure. That's a cousin. And that's a brother. I think it was something that really, Ted is such an interesting person, as Maylee says, and I think, and after spending all of these years with him, I've never met anyone like him. And I do think that there is, I mean, of course, the film showed that he is flawed, but when it comes down to it, he really is, he did do so many good things that he didn't even think twice about. I mean, there were stories that while we were filming, it was the Cambodian dance troupe, for example. And he said, oh, I took in 52 kids and let them all stay in my mansion. And Jose and I, we were like, did that really happen? Or is he just saying this? And it did, because the kids were like, yeah, the house was crazy. His kids were like, the house was crazy. There were people everywhere. They're like, why is our house so full of people? But we thought he may have, put his own glaze and spin on it. And I was in Cambodia and I was getting nowhere. And it happened so long ago. I asked Christy's sister, I'm like, what was the name of the dance troupe? Is there any information? I'm getting dead ends everywhere. And finally I'm in Cambodia and we have a steak dinner. It's my last night there. And he's treating us to this steak dinner. And he says, oh, let's just go for one coffee. And I was actually tired, but I'm like, of course, if he says I have to go. And I was at this coffee. And I somehow, as I said, Ted, God, do you have any detail on that dance troupe? Because I just can't find anything. And Ted says, oh, were you looking? Oh, come here. And he's the guy who sat next to me at dinner, or like 2 seats away. He's like, this kid was in the dance troupe. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And I'm like, what? And he said, oh yeah, all of it's true. Everything is true. All of us lived there. We all jumped in the pool. We used his house. We used his boat. And there was stuff that Ted didn't even remember. He said, I never forgot him. He took us, we all went to DC. We went to the White House. We saw President Bush Sr. We all shook hands with him. We saw him take off in a helicopter. Oh, and then Ted took us all to New York and we all went to a Broadway show. And Ted says, I did? And he said, I don't even remember. And he said, yeah, we'll never forget you because you did all of this for us. So they lost touch. He went back to Cambodia, this kid. And when Facebook started, this kid said that Ted was the first person he looked for because he never forgot him because of the impact that he made. And so there are stories and I'm like, God, is this really true? And then you'd find out not only were they true, they'd be even better than what you thought they were. So there's all kinds of stuff that Ted's like, I don't even remember. He said this in a way, and so it didn't really come out as like a humble brag kind of way, but he said, look, I was just kind of doing this kind of stuff all the time. It wasn't really a big deal that I'm going to remember that I did this good deed. He just said he was just kind of doing stuff all the time and he actually can't remember. So
That's unbelievable. How many stories must you have wanted to include in the movie that just didn't like fit? Because I'm listening to this and I was like, I need to know more about all of these stories. I mean, that's what an incredible experience.
So many. And it was incredible. Yeah. We met this and then we saw him like, oh, there he is in the picture as like a little like 13-year-old. And now he's this grown man who just thinks the world of Ted. I mean, imagine if you're 13 and stranded in a country because you don't have money to go home. This is the guy who takes you to meet the president and go to New York and flies you home and your 51 other friends.
Taking these kids to see a Broadway musical, like this is super American stuff. I mean, that's really incredible. And just to like sort of keep going with the American dream concept, because I thought that was a really powerful statement in the opening of the movie too. Like, Philippa, you're asking people all the time, like, what does America mean to you? What is the current, I don't know, what are the current shades of the American dream right now? What answers are you getting?
I mean, there's this really great book that came out a few years ago that I can never remember the exact title, but it's basically like the 11 nations of America. And it basically says that America is made up of 11 different nations / cultures. And so there is no way to say this is the American dream. Like we just all have our own dreams. And the dream is that we have the freedoms and liberties to in theory, achieve things if we choose or how we choose. Because I was thinking about like my cousin, his American dream is very different from mine. Like for example, I'm not a money-driven person. And, for him, acquiring wealth is the most important thing. Whereas for me, it's like acquiring art, So, but the point is we both get to achieve the American dream. It just doesn't look the same. But on the other hand, we can go off on this other tangent too, but like not everybody has the privileges, even though the freedoms are in theory available to all of us, systemically, we don't necessarily all have access to that. So I do think a lot about that in a lot of the work that we're doing when we're hearing from people, some who say, well, all you have to do is work hard and you can imagine and achieve the dream, just like Ted Noy. On the other hand, you can work 3 jobs and never achieve, most of us don't build a donut empire and become moguls. So, you can work your ass off and still never achieve that. So I keep that always in the back of my mind that, that's not
Yeah.
necessarily available to everybody.
Well, there was, oh, sorry, there was
Go ahead.
one of the questions in one of our screenings was a kid from USC and said, wow, this film is so cool and so inspiring, but like, I don't think that is applicable today. Like the American dream is dead. This was the view of like a 20-year-old student at USC. Do you think that the American dream is still alive and well? And I said, that's a good question, because actually just last year, I met this sort of new acquaintance friend of mine, and he's from Egypt. And he's now living in California. And he was like, I don't understand why every American person is dissing on America. He's like, look, I came from Egypt. I came from the Arab Spring, and I had a certain fate and where I was born in life, where my life would be in Egypt. And now I came to California. He's married this American girl. He's surfing. He never thought in his entire life that he would learn to surf. And he's got a decent job. I can't even remember what it is that he does, but he said, this is the greatest country on earth. He's like, this would never happen in Egypt. Any one of those things, marrying hopefully he would marry the girl of his dreams either in Egypt. But anyway, it was like he found love, this freedom to go and surf. So whether it is, again, financially driven or what your idea of the American dream is, like this individual could not have been happier to be here in the California sunshine and seeing palm trees every day. So I think it is still very much alive and well, whether it is money or palm trees or whatever they're
Might look different to a lot of different people, but there are a lot of options. And maybe they don't all pan out, but it sounds like, I don't know, at least to me, when I was listening to you, Philippa, and you, Alice, a little bit, I wanted to talk to Maylee a little bit about the hard work aspect, because that to me was so striking in the movie. It was like everyone was on call 24 hours to really do this. What was that like? And what kind of hard work is it still for you right now?
Yeah, I mean, DK's Donuts is a 24-hour operation. Like, I get calls from my mom at like 10:30 at night, and it goes, this person's calling out sick. Can you do, 11 p.m. to 5 a.m.? And, I go, yeah, like, I got you, mom. But also it's like, I watch my mom and how, she's really stepped back into work, and she's putting in like 14-hour days. She comes home and I look at her, I'm like, mom, like, like, what can I really do? Because this is our lifeline. This donut shop is like her baby of 40 years, doing the same things, of coming into these, really intense issues with coming with like, running your own business. It's like the donut shop business is a very unique business, as like the hard work is just always there. Each person has their workload. We have multiple bakers. They all have a ton of things to do. We have the front of house staff. They have customers angry or happy to deal with. They have online orders coming in nonstop. We have custom orders and giant orders. I mean, today we just did like a 300 donut order for the show Dave. And so it's like,
hey.
yeah, all these things like are adding on, and so the hard work thing, it's like, yes, it's a celebration of success, but also at the cost of, it's the cost of our staff members who are on their feet for, 12 hours per day, more so, more or less, my mom, who's pretty stressed out, family stuff, it's like expectations of hard work in the family. And, I always look to my mom as like my idol of just this person who works so hard, no matter what. She doesn't complain. She only asks for help like at her very last moment. And, I'm just there to support her throughout that. In like, for the Cambodians who came here, even, before I was born, who started these donut shops, I mean, that's hard. They don't even know the language. They barely like understand what a donut is per se. Like, they're just, my mom, when she started even working at a donut shop, she's like, I just told them to point. I didn't know, hi, hello. Okay, thank you. Goodbye. Like there's just so many obstacles that even as like I think of the immigrants who came over, like my parents, of how a struggle it is for them then, but now you've just got a whole new like a ballpark of other issues and things that really contribute to this thing called hard work. For me personally, like I'm like doing emails all day. I'm on calls with people. I'm conducting all these projects and also putting in work. So it's like a nonstop thing, but it's fulfilling just to know like that we are a big part of the community. We see families come in all the time with their daughters and sons, and this is just like a part of their day, a part of their routine, or just a celebration. And seeing them smile with joy, it kind of like melts away just like all the hard work tiredness I feel. And I go, okay, this is why I sacrifice, this is why we do this, because we can really be that cornerstone for our community as well as for my own family.
And I feel like there was that scene in the movie where the Dunkin' Donuts comes in and there's like the busiest day ever, and I would like to believe that it's all this hard work and like the personal connection that comes through, which is why people are like, let's shop local, let's support our businesses. What do you do when you move into a community, and like how do you make that connection as a business owner? I think it definitely, you can taste it in the donuts, but unfortunately I don't have a donut of yours in front of me right now. I wish I did.
Well, yes, obviously they're going to come for the donuts, but there's like, I think what I did when I, stepped into the shop after I graduated college was I started to really create and build relationships. I started to really inquire and get curious about the people who we were serving, and, their families and what's going on with them. If I had more time in the day or more hands, like I would even follow up even further. But sometimes, the littlest part that I get to play in their lives, whether they come in for a coffee or they're talking to me about their daughter's birthday, it's building community. I feel like it's just understanding that there's another human being in front of you, and understanding that serving them is an absolute honor, that they would choose us over a big chain, that they would choose us over the 4 or 5 other donut shops within a mile range. And I am always so incredibly grateful and thankful for their support. And, they always come back at me with that same gratitude. They're just like, thank you so much for being here for all these years. Or, oh my God, when I was in college, you saved me, you kept me well fed. I just see it time and time again with every interaction that has to do with being the donut princess and engaging with them. And even for National Donut Day, I put on a huge community event. I had the pink carpet, I had DJ set, I had a little balloon arch, just so that people could, come out of this pandemic, enjoy a donut, and just get together with community with some live music. And, it's absolutely beautiful. I get to be this role model and player in my community. And for also the rest of our community, which is like the less fortunate, like we're dropping off donuts to the homeless like every day. My mom is like always adamant, like, let's pack these, let's drop them off. Or sometimes she'll tell me, hey, can you drop them off here? And like, we're always giving back in ways. Like we've had like the Make March Matter campaign, which benefited the Children's Hospital. We participated in the Caring for Cambodia campaign, which, we got to provide like food and school for a child for a year. Like there's so many ways that this little tiny donut shop can like really play a big part in community. And the relationships and friendships that I've got from this is truly incredible.
And I think one of the myths that seems to keep reasserting itself is that immigrants take your jobs, and it's just so the opposite. Like I'm listening to you about your donut shop giving back and like serving all these donuts to the homeless, and the amount of restaurants opened and revenue generated, like it's just not true. In the US, there's actually been almost 4 million jobs created by Asian-owned restaurants. Like this couldn't be clearer that it's a myth.
I think in many ways that immigrants end up doing the jobs that other people don't want to do. And immigrants are like literally generating money for the economy. And there are so many positive things about immigrants coming to this country that I feel like is overlooked in many ways. And I just wish that we could change the conversation around that.
I think this movie and this panel is a really good start. So I want to thank you all again so much for being here and doing this work and sharing, your personal stories. I do want to ask Alice one thing that I talked to her about early on about the movie, and it was the scene where Ted goes back into his like mansion home. And I remember asking you, I was like, how did you get that scene? It was so clearly his house. And yet at the same time, it's like he'd gone back to Cambodia. So can you tell me and everybody else?
Oh, wow. That was a lot of fun. So that mansion, dreams do come true, right? So that mansion, many dreams have come true, including getting Mei Li's mom. That was a dream. That was like an 18-month dream. And the other 18-month dream was the mansion. So this mythical mansion, where he used to live, and when he flew too close to the sun and that he lost that mansion. I was like, how am I going to get in there? And I even called people I knew in Orange County who I thought were smart and well connected. And I said, hey, so like, how can I get into these gated communities? And they laughed. They're like, gated communities are there to keep people like you out. They're gated for a reason. So unless you really know someone in there, it's pretty hard to like, and I'm like, well, you're really likable. And I mean, we can persuade. He's like, no, not really. And so Ted was here, and he was here for like 3 weeks in California. And it was the day before he was about to leave. And we had shot so many incredible scenes with him. And in kind of passing conversation with his eldest son, Chet, I said, thank you, Chet, for driving Ted around everywhere to do this for us. And gosh, if only I could just get that mansion. And he just casually says, he's like, well, if you have $3.2 million, you can buy it. It's on the market. And I was like, did you just say that it's on the market? Hold on. And I'm like, what's the address? I instantly typed it in. I went to Redfin. I scheduled an open house tour straight away. And about 5 minutes later, I get a call back from a Redfin agent. He's like, great. I see that you're interested in a tour. But of course, being the price that it was, he's like, well, cool. Can you send over your pre-qual letter and your proof of funds? And I'm like, oh God, what am I going to do? I'm like, I don't have proof of funds for a $3.2 million house. And I decided to I started thinking about all these different schemes and scenarios. I'm like, all right, if I go into the camera, do I pretend that I'm a crazy rich Asian and Ted is my dad, or I'm an influencer and that's why I have camera following us everywhere? I'm like trying to think of all of these different, a web of lies to spin, right? And I just decided to come clean. And I said, I have no intention of buying the house. This is what I'm up to. I'm a filmmaker, Ted Noy, blah, blah, blah. The other line goes silent for a minute. And he says, Alice, that's incredible. I'm going to help you. And I was like, no way. He's like, hold tight. You're going to film in this mansion. And then hours pass and I check back in with him. I said, what's up, Joe? And he says, oh my God. He's like, the owners and the listing agent of this house are not playing ball. He's like, can you tell me what kind of last name this is? And it was A-N. I was like, that's a Chinese last name. And he's like, they're not understanding. It's like, no, culturally, if they're like Chinese, they're not going to understand this, like, come in and film in my house. And he's like, sorry, I really tried, but like they're holding tight. And I just sat and I stewed until it was 9 p.m., which is too late to call somebody that you don't know. And I wouldn't give up. And I typed in the name of that realtor and I was like, his cell phone has to be listed somewhere. And I found it and I called him and I spoke Chinese to him. I said, hey, this is the deal. You have to let me film in this house, please. And he's like, let me check with the owner. And he says, all right, you guys can do it. Here's the lockbox code. And there we were. It was a once in a lifetime opportunity. The stars had aligned. I mean, I'm still pinching myself how we got into that mansion, but I think it was such a powerful scene. I can't even imagine the film without it.
Oh, I think about it all the time. And I love this story and how, you just came clean and you were like, all right, this is what I'm going to do.
the complicated web of lies that I was ready to spin.
Oh, I would have done the same thing. I would have been like, what's my angle here? What do we think is really going to get me access into this house? And I would have really worked myself into it till I believed it. And then at the end, you just have to be like, no, this is what I'm doing. Just please.
Yeah, I was like, these are all absurd. And I'm like, how far am I going to carry this whole charade before it all comes tumbling down?
Oh, when I think about the charades I've done in my day, well, hopefully this will inspire me to be more truthful. But I realize we're coming to the end of our time here. So I was hoping that we could all play a tiny food-related speed round of preferences, just to share a little bit more unexpected by ourselves. And all right, so questions for all of you. Which kind of donut would you rather have, glazed or chocolate?
Glazed.
Glazed.
All of us glazed. Interesting. All right. Toasted coconut, yay or nay?
Yay.
Oh, nay. I'm gonna go. Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Wow. This is the real
Wow.
explosion of the whole panel.
Wow.
I know. I can't do it.
We can't come to an understanding here. I know what I all said. I take it all back. There's no understanding to be had.
I know. You know what? I feel this is almost like saying like pineapple on pizza.
I
I'm a
love
definitive
pineapple
nay.
on pizza.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, we all have our coconut moment, the outlier. All right, desserts, chocolate or cheese?
Cheese.
Chocolate.
I was really expecting somebody to here to be like both, like just totally ignore the rules of the game. I guess I'm gonna say chocolate. All right, spicy or mild?
Extra spicy.
Spicy.
I'm gonna call myself an aspiring spicy. All right, last one for movies. Horror or action?
Action.
Action.
Neither.
All right, you'll give in. Well, thank you all so much for your time. This has been such a great conversation. I will let you return to your lives unless there's anything else that anybody wants to add or reflect on or say. All right, we did it all. We covered it all.
We did it all. I'm just say a quick thank you to everybody here. Katherine, thank you for what you're doing, and Philippa for highlighting the importance of refugees and immigrants to the fabric of the United States. As the child of immigrants, I think we're pretty awesome, and we feel, I think I speak for Maylee, I mean, we're American through and through. We're really proud of our heritage. We love what you're doing and hope that, yeah, again, that this film is opening minds and hearts about what it means to be an immigrant and what it means to be American. And I've been meaning to say this to you since the beginning, Philippa. The actual, like in our edit process and what the core of the Donut King is, the question that was posed was, what does it mean to be American? And that was a question every time that there was something of should this go in the film? We're like, is it in the service of that question? What does it mean to be American? So I think it's really cool that that is a question that's been a recurring theme here.
Awesome.
Oh, well, that was a perfect note to end on. So hope everybody has a wonderful night. Thank you all for sharing your time and your work with us, and we'll see you again soon. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.